Grandpa introduced himself to the neighborhood the way a thunderhead introduces rain. Loud, sudden, and not taking a vote. Picture this. A pale morning sun skimming the roofs on Cedar Brook Reserve. Sprinklers whispering in sync like the street practices its breathing. And my grandpa Roy Malaloy, 80 if he admits it, standing on our porch in boxers, tube socks, and a faded trucker cap that says Vietnam vets don't miss, pumping a shell into his old 12-gauge while a hummingbird of a drone hovers outside the bathroom window like it paid rent to peep. He muttered, "Nope," shouldered the shotgun and took one clean shot. The drone pinwheeled, caught a flicker of flame, and bled plastic into Mom Chin's azaleas 2 doors down. 3 car alarms argued about whose job it was to be startled. I wish I could tell you I reacted with the wisdom of a future Supreme Court justice, but I was 14 holding half a toaster waffle and thinking, so, do we need a lawyer or an extinguisher first? Turns out the answer was both because the foam brand fire can under Grandpa's sink is vintage but still mean. And the HOA president, Brittany Consincade, part Pilates, part policy, was already buzzing up the street in a white golf cart with the HOA crest on the front like a tiny coat of arms. She had 2 guys in khaki polos jogging behind her with clipboards and sunglasses, as if shrub compliance demanded Secret Service protocols. "What in God's magazine catalog did you do, Roy?" she hissed, stepping off the cart in a salmon blazer that could signal aircraft. Grandpa ejected the spent shell, slid another in with the same calm you use to tie your shoes, and said, "Removed a trespasser, Brittany. You're welcome." "That trespasser was HOA equipment," she snapped, waving a hand so a diamond ring caught the sun and drew a line through my eyelids. "Authorized under Community Guideline 47D. One clipboard echoed like a bingo caller. Grandpa looked past her at the bathroom window, then back. "It was 6 feet from my porcelain throne. If 47D says you get to film me in my skivvies, you printed the Bible wrong." That was the first time I felt the street itself inhale. It wasn't shock exactly, more like curiosity choking on perfume. Curtains pinched. A neighbor's Labrador yipped once and rethought it. The clipboards wrote hostile. I'm pretty sure even if they didn't have a box for shot down our peeping robot. Me, I just kept my waffle like it was a passport. Then doused a little smoke curling out of Mom Chin's shrubs and whispered, "Sorry to the plant gods." The notice came that afternoon, a trifold with embossed leaves and language that smelled like artificial lemon. Mandatory disciplinary review, Cedar Brook Reserve, HOA. They scheduled it for 9 a.m. the next day like we were in homeroom. That night, over beef stew and Grandpa's very honest black coffee, I told him about a blinking red light I'd seen the day before near the kitchen window. He went quiet in the way old noses go quiet when they're counting wind. Then said, "Give me patterns, flight times, entry points. We're actually going to war with the HOA, I asked. He didn't blink. "Kid, your HOA declared it when they bought a camera that makes 3-axis turns and sends the footage to someone's laptop at 2 a.m. Give me patterns." Cedar Brook. Reserve is the kind of subdivision that believes in matching shutters. Mailbox posts, even the time the sprinklers go on. The handbook Brittany gives new residents could stop a door if anyone used the front door. It prescribes curtain colors, lawn heights, and appropriate wreath diameters for holidays I haven't even heard of. But nothing in 300 pages mentions drones, and certainly not ones that fly the same route every morning. Miss Delgado's coral fence, Mr. Banerjee's solar panels, then the Gwynn family's pride flag, technically visible from public right-of-way, Brittany likes to say as if the sun needs HOA approval to look through a window. Inside the review, Brittany sat at a folding table dressed like a tribunal. 3 board members in beige that whispered, a flag with the subdivision's crest behind them, and a picture of water no one touched. On the table, a pile of scorched carbon fiber, photos printed from a feed, an illegal pad with Roy Malaloy underlined twice. One khaki stood and announced, "Destruction of property, environmental damage, disturbance of peace." Grandpa interrupted. "Add indecent surveillance of a veteran on private property. And while we're adding, terrible aim ain't on your list." Brittany's smile could cut glass. "We are a community of rules, Roy." "Then show me the rule that says you can put a camera up my bathroom window without knocking." Beige number 2 shuffled papers. "We do not have that rule documented in the handbook." "So you invented it." Grandpa said, with the same tiredness you hear from people who've seen too much. They fined him $2,000 and gave him 30 days to appeal. He laughed until he coughed, then coughed until he swore, then swore he'd never give them more than a nickel washer. I might have let it go if the drone had been some kid's toy. It wasn't. When Brittany's people weren't looking, I pocketed a shard of the casing. Later, in Grandpa's garage, I cleaned grease off the inside and found a faint serial code etched like a secret. I sent a photo to a drone forum where people argue about antenna ranges and call each other captain like it's the Navy. The reply came quick with the kind of excitement that scares you. Not a consumer serial. Looks like modified military surplus. Facial recognition firmware. Very illegal in private hands. I called my friend Chloe. She once reprogrammed our school's bathroom signs to say VIP lounge and held my phone so she could see the code. She squinted, chewing a pen cap. "That's not Best Buy," she said. "That's surveillance lab stuff. What's your HOA doing?" "Running a pilot program for Big Brother, or someone's using our HOA as a cover," I said, feeling both 12 and 70. The thing about secrets is once you see one, you start seeing them everywhere, like lampposts you never noticed at noon. The HOA office sits bolted onto the community pool building. It's beige stucco and glass like every office park in America. But if you stand behind the maintenance door at sunset, you can watch a sliver of a room where screens glow like a wall of aquarium fish. One night, I rode past on my bike and saw a man in a white polo wearing headphones, flipping between feeds from people's kitchens and yards. He wasn't one of the khaki clipboard guys. He moved like he'd been trained to move. Short, efficient motions, no wasted time, like a soldier in a place that forgot there was a war. I ducked behind the hedge, heart battering my ribs, and pulled out my phone to record. His screen showed not just our street, but overlays, thermal, zooms on license plates, faces with data tags. It looked like the kind of footage you see in spy movies when someone says, "asset acquired." My stomach went cold. Chloe had been right. This wasn't about HOA lawn wars. Someone was running surveillance through Cedar Brook Reserve. My thumb slipped and I nearly dropped my phone. The man turned like he'd heard it, his head cocked. For a second, his gaze met mine through the reflection of the glass. I bolted, bike chain rattling like bones, and didn't stop pedaling until I was back at Grandpa's garage. He was at the workbench cleaning the 12-gauge with the patience of a monk. I told him everything. His face didn't move, but his eyes went a color I hadn't seen. Stormwater dark. "We're going to need more than patterns," he said. "We're going to need proof." He reached under the bench and pulled out a battered metal box, flipped the latch, and inside was not just ammo but a folded map of Cedar Brook Reserve, notes scrawled in his handwriting, circles around lamp posts, utility sheds, and what he called nodes. He'd been watching them too. "They're not just spying," he said. "They're building something." Outside, sprinklers hissed like snakes. I thought of Brittany's diamond ring catching the sun like a laser. Grandpa looked up at me. "Tomorrow night," he said, "we go hunting." Tomorrow night came with the kind of humidity that feels like someone breathing on your neck. Grandpa didn't talk much, just checked the latches on his old field jacket and stuffed a pair of night vision binoculars into my backpack like he was packing school lunch. "We stay quiet, we stay low, and if anyone asks, we're bird watching," he said, sliding a flashlight into his pocket. I didn't ask what kind of birds glow blue on thermal cameras. The subdivision slept behind its manicured hedges, every house identical enough to confuse GPS. The HOA brochure called it Planned Serenity. Tonight it felt like a maze built by control freaks. We moved through it like shadows. Grandpa with the calm of someone who'd crawled through jungles, me trying not to kick a sprinkler head. At the corner near the pool house, he crouched and motioned me down. Through the crack in the maintenance door, that same white polo man sat again at his station. But now there were more screens, 12, maybe 15, and one showed a map of the entire community, each house glowing with a faint pulse. Grandpa whispered, "That's heat signature mapping." Another screen showed rows of numbers, probably addresses or ID codes. Then one caught my eye, ours highlighted in red. "They tagged us," I whispered. He nodded. "They tag threats." I felt my throat tighten. The man turned in his chair, speaking to someone off-screen. A woman's voice answered, low and clipped, impossible to mistake. "Brittany Consincade. Proceed with the trial run tonight, she said. We'll need to test the integration before sunrise. Grandpa's fingers clenched around the flashlight. Trial run of what? I mouthed. But he was already moving, tracing the wiring from the building to a box at the base of the hedge. He popped it open, and inside were coils of fiber optics, glowing faintly blue. They're networked, he muttered. Someone's feeding them data. Then he froze. Footsteps. From the far side of the pool, 2 khaki uniforms appeared, carrying what looked like a large drone frame, bigger than the one he shot, easily 6 feet across. Its body gleamed matte black, with small protrusions that didn't look like cameras anymore. They looked like weapons. They militarized it, Grandpa whispered. That's not surveillance, that's suppression tech. One of the men said, Ms. Consincade wants a perimeter sweep, heat sensors calibrated by dawn. Copy that, the other replied. Once the uplink to Central's stable, we're green. Grandpa's hand shot to my shoulder. Central, he said under his breath. They're reporting to someone higher. We backed away slowly, every nerve screaming. Then, as we turned, my sneaker caught a loose sprinkler head. It snapped, releasing a hiss of water that sounded like a scream. Both men's flashlights swung our way. Hey, who's there? Grandpa shoved me behind a bush, raised his hand and threw something small and metallic, a nut or washer maybe, across the lawn. It pinged against a drain pipe 50 feet away. The lights jerked toward the noise. Go, he whispered, pushing me ahead. We darted down the side path and didn't stop until the pool house was a blur behind us. At the corner, he leaned against a mailbox, catching his breath. They'll tighten security now, he said. We need allies. Allies? Like who? Like people who still believe privacy ain't optional. He meant the neighbors, the same ones who peeked through curtains when he fired the shotgun. The next day, Grandpa did what he always did when the world got too complicated. He barbecued. By noon, the smell of smoked ribs had pulled half the street out of their air-conditioned caves. Miss Delgado brought lemonade. Mr. Banerjee, who built solar panels out of boredom, showed up with potato salad. Even Brittany drifted by in her golf cart, smiling that smile that meant the HOA was about to deliver paperwork. Grandpa handed her a rib and said, "Peace offering." She looked at it like it was a grenade. "We'll be needing the fine paid, Roy," she said, "before further penalties accrue." "Sure," he said. "Tell your accountant to check with Central Command." She blinked. "Central Command?" He grinned, and for a second I thought she flinched. "You enjoy your Sunday, Brittany." She drove off faster than usual. That night, we met Chloe behind the playground. She'd hacked the drone forum again and traced the serial number. "It's registered under a dummy corporation, Paramaxis Innovations," she said. Sounds boring, right? Except they're subcontractors for a Department of Defense pilot program, facial recognition, crowd management, and predictive behavior mapping. Predictive what? I asked. They claim to predict intent based on micro-expressions, like you frown too hard and the system flags you as a potential threat. Grandpa muttered, "They're testing it here." Chloe nodded. "And guess whose name shows up on their local oversight board? Brittany Consincade." I felt the air drain out of my lungs. Grandpa just said, "Figures." He unfolded his map again. "Every node here connects to the HOA office, which connects to something external. We cut that link, we see who screams." The plan was insane, but so was spying on an old man's bathroom. Around 2 a.m., we moved again, me, Grandpa, and Chloe with her laptop glowing like a ghost light. The streets were silent except for the mechanical click of sprinklers. We reached the fiber junction box behind the pool house. Grandpa handed me the flashlight. "Keep it steady." Chloe crouched, pulled out a tangle of cables, and plugged in a small device. Her fingers flew. "Okay," she whispered. "If I'm right, this should route all outgoing data through my laptop." The screen filled with code, then static, then images, rows of faces, thermal overlays, metadata streams. It was every resident in Cedarbrook. Brittany had dossiers on all of them, finances, routines, even flagged behaviors. "They're scoring people," Chloe said. "It's like a social credit system, but hidden." "Look," I said, pointing. "There's Grandpa." His file was marked in red. Level 4 threat, non-compliant, prior service, firearm ownership. Grandpa snorted. Guess they did their homework. Then Chloe frowned. Wait, there's another connection. The screen flickered and suddenly a live video feed appeared. Brittany in her home office, headset on, speaking to someone unseen. Phase 2 commences tonight, she said. Authorized drone deployment grid. A voice answered, male, calm, professional. Copy that. All data channels synced to Command Center Bravo. Grandpa's jaw tightened. Bravo's military. Meaning? I asked. Meaning she's got government clearance or someone's using her credentials. Then, without warning, Brittany looked straight into the camera. And tell our observers, she said, if anyone tampers with the network, execute protocol blackout. Chloe's laptop beeped. Uh-oh. The screen went black. They know we're here. A spotlight snapped on over the pool house, bathing us in white light. Hands where I can see them, a voice barked. The man in the white polo stepped out, this time with a sidearm holstered at his waist. 2 khaki guards flanked him. Step away from the equipment, Grandpa whispered. Run! I froze. Chloe hesitated. He shouted, now! And shoved me backward as the white polo man reached for his weapon. The sound that followed was chaos, metal scraping, a shout, the crack of gunfire echoing across perfectly trimmed lawns. I remember the smell of ozone, the flash of light, the sudden silence after. When my vision cleared, the white polo man was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, and Grandpa stood over him with the 12-gauge smoking. You tell your boss, Grandpa said, voice trembling but steady. We don't scare easy. Then came the hum. A rising mechanical whine from above. We looked up. 3 drones, larger than before, descending in perfect formation, red lights blinking like angry eyes. Backyard, Grandpa barked. Move! We ran, cutting through yards past sprinklers and garden gnomes, the drones tracking us like vultures. Chloe's laptop beeped wildly. They're pinging my signal! And she yanked a cord free, throwing it into a trash bin. We dove behind our fence just as one drone fired a dart that hissed into the lawn, leaving a smoking hole. Grandpa lifted the shotgun, aimed, and fired once. 1 drone spiraled down in sparks. 2 remained. He handed me the extra shells. Kid, he said, this ain't about fines anymore. They want control. The second drone swept lower, a voice from its speaker barking, Citizen Malaloy, cease hostile action. Grandpa grinned. Hostile action? You ain't seen hostile yet. He shot again. The drone exploded like fireworks over our yard. Chloe screamed as debris rained down. The third drone paused, hovering, then zipped skyward and vanished into the clouds. For a heartbeat, everything went still except the sound of the sprinklers. Grandpa lowered the gun. They'll be back, he said. And next time they won't send toys. He looked at me and Chloe, both of us shaking. Get some sleep, he said, though none of us would. By morning, Cedar Brook looked normal again. Lawns trimmed, flags fluttering, no sign of the chaos. But every mailbox carried a new notice. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Mandatory attendance. Grandpa held the paper, chuckled without humor, and said, Guess they're calling the War Council. Grandpa didn't sleep that night, not in the way normal people do. He just simmered in the dark like a coffee pot that refused to cool, muttering coordinates under his breath while the cicadas outside sang like faulty wiring. And when I crept out to the porch around 2 a.m., he was already there, polishing the old 12-gauge by the light of the porch lamp. A map of Cedar Brook spread across his knees, every cul-de-sac marked with a red X. They think they can watch us, huh? He said without looking up, his voice soft and dangerous. Then we'll give 'em something to watch. By dawn, he'd turned the garage into what looked like a Vietnam-era ops room. Cords, monitors, static, and the smell of solder and vengeance. The fragment of drone casing I'd found now sat wired into a Frankenstein console of spare radios and a laptop running a program that made no sense to me, but made Grandpa smile like a fox in a henhouse. When the sun cracked the sky, we could already see another drone hovering over the reserve pond. This one's smaller, quieter, meaner. "Recon model," he said, squinting. "They sent a scout to count the damage." He picked up a remote that looked like a car battery with buttons. "Let's introduce ourselves." The sound that followed was a low hum, almost like a growl, and then the drone's feed on the screen flickered, glitched, and froze until the view flipped. We weren't watching the drone. The drone was watching us, broadcasting a live video straight back to their control room. Grandpa raised his mug, sipped black coffee, and said, "Smile for the HOA, kid." Then he pulled a lever, and the drone dropped from the sky like it had remembered gravity mid-sentence. Within the hour, Brittany Consincade herself was knocking at our door with her trademark salmon blazer and the composure of someone who'd just realized she might be outmatched. "Roy," she said, voice trembling but rehearsed, "we've had—" "Another incident." Grandpa leaned against the doorway. "You mean another defense action? You folks really ought to label your toys before flying them into private property." Behind her, two men in khaki whispered into earpieces. Not clipboards this time, earpieces. I caught a glint of holster steel under one of their polos. That was new. "We'll be conducting an inspection," Brittany said, trying to sound official. But the word inspection felt heavy, like she wasn't the one who'd chosen it. "Not without a warrant, you won't," Grandpa said, slamming the door before her hand finished its next gesture. He turned to me, eyes sharp. "They've got muscle now. That means they're scared." By midday, Cedarbrook wasn't Cedarbrook anymore. Vans with blank sides lined the main road. Men pretending to be electricians climbed poles that had never needed fixing. Mrs. Banerjee's dog barked nonstop until someone cut her Wi-Fi and the dog went silent, confused. The whole subdivision pulsed with a tension no one admitted existed. I went out on my bike pretending to run an errand and saw the same white polo guy from the pool office talking into a tablet by the tennis courts. On his screen, tiny live feeds from several homes, including ours. I turned my bike around so fast my back tire screeched, and by the time I got home, Grandpa was waiting with a duffel bag and an expression that meant, "Don't ask questions, just move." Inside were walkie-talkies, an ancient pair of binoculars, a GoPro duct taped to a helmet, and, because it was Grandpa, beef jerky. "We're going on recon," he said, loading up the truck. "Sunset's when they switch operators. I want to see who clocks in." We parked behind the maintenance shed by the pool around 8. The place was quiet except for the hum of the pool pump and the crickets. Grandpa pried open a vent panel with a screwdriver and motioned for me to peek in. What I saw wasn't an office. It was a surveillance hub. Rows of monitors showed every corner of Cedarbrook, each tagged with house numbers, some zoomed inside through curtains and half-closed blinds. A man in uniform, no HOA badge this time, sat in front of the main screen, typing commands, the glow of the monitors painting his face in pale blue light. I pulled back. "Grandpa," I whispered, "that's not HOA." He nodded slowly. "Nope, that's federal issue." I froze. "As in government?" He smiled thinly. "As in someone who shouldn't be using your mom's kitchen feed to calibrate software." We slipped back into the truck, hearts pounding. He drove without headlights, coasting down the back road that curved by the golf course. "They're testing facial recognition algorithms," he said finally. "These drones, this isn't about keeping lawns the same height. They're collecting behavioral data, mapping routines. HOA's just the storefront." "For who?" I asked. He gave a humorless chuckle. "For whoever pays enough to know what time you take your trash out." When we got home, the power flickered twice, and every smart device in the house rebooted. Grandpa stared at the ceiling, then pulled the circuit breaker down manually. "From now on," he said, "we're analog." The next day, the official letter came, embossed with too many seals for comfort. Notice of expulsion from Cedarbrook Reserve. They gave us 48 hours to vacate for endangerment to community safety. Grandpa laughed until he wheezed, then grabbed the map off the wall and spread it again. "If they're kicking us out," he said, "we're leaving fireworks." He spent the day digging behind the garage, unearthing things I didn't know existed, an old radio jammer, a metal box labeled decoy protocol, and a roll of copper wire thick as a finger. I helped, half terrified, half exhilarated. By nightfall, the property looked like a retired soldier's fever dream. Wires in the ground, antennas pointing at the sky, tarps covering God knows what. "What are we doing?" I asked. "We're setting bait," he said. "They want to test their system? Let's give them a stress test they'll never forget." At precisely midnight, a low buzz began. More drones than I'd ever seen, sweeping over rooftops like a mechanical tide. Grandpa flipped a switch on the breaker box he'd rewired earlier. Every sprinkler, every porch light, every decorative garden lamp in our yard flicked on in synchronized bursts, blinding the sky. The drones scattered, confused, their sensors overwhelmed. Grandpa whooped. "That's right, boys. Can't track what you can't see." Then he pointed the shotgun skyward and fired one blank, just for punctuation. A flare of light exploded near the HOA office. One of his decoys had gone off. The drones swarmed toward it like moths, leaving our side dark. Grandpa grabbed my shoulder. "Now we move." We ran to the truck and drove straight toward the pool building. He parked behind the same maintenance shed, got out and pulled from the duffel a device that looked like an old car antenna wired to a lunchbox. "EMP pulse," he said. "Homemade, low yield. Won't fry pacemakers, but will make those drones forget their names." He pressed a button. The air cracked like a distant thunderclap, and every drone light in the sky blinked out at once. Silence fell over Cedar Brook. Then came the alarms, house after house, car after car, as the smart grid collapsed. Grandpa grinned in the flicker of the dashboard light. "Congratulations, kid. We just liberated suburbia." But liberation didn't last. Within minutes, black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, unmarked but official in the way black SUVs always are. Men in tactical vests fanned out, scanning rooftops with handheld devices. We ducked behind the truck as one of them radioed. "Signal origin traced near Lot 17. "That was us," Grandpa whispered. "Stay put." He stepped out, hands raised, calm as a man greeting the mailman. "Evening, fellas," he said. "Lose something?" One of the agents, tall, jaw like rebar, leveled his flashlight. "Roy Malaloy?" Grandpa nodded. "You're under investigation for interference with federal property." "Property?" Grandpa echoed. "Buddy, your property's been spying through bathroom windows." The man didn't flinch. "We have authorization." Grandpa took a step closer, squinting at the badge clipped to the man's vest. "Authorization from who?" "Department of Infrastructure and Community Stability," the agent said, which sounded like something invented 5 minutes ago. "Never heard of it," Grandpa said. "That's because you're not supposed to," the agent replied, voice flat. I wanted to scream, but Grandpa's look froze me. Then the man's radio crackled. "Command, be advised, local feed compromised. We're seeing internal breach. Someone's accessing the main terminal." Another voice. "What? Who's in the control room?" I saw Grandpa's grin stretch slow and dangerous. "Guess Chloe found the right Wi-Fi," he murmured. My phone buzzed in my pocket, text from Chloe. "Tell him it worked." "Stream live now." Grandpa gave a small nod. "You're on camera, gentlemen," he said, pointing to the street lamp. Every remaining light post in Cedar Brook flickered on, broadcasting the agents' faces straight to every home's TV and phone screen. Chloe had hijacked the network. The whole neighborhood was watching. Brittany appeared then, barefoot, her salmon blazer wrinkled, screaming at the agents to stop. But it was too late. The footage on the screens showed not Grandpa, but their own surveillance archives, residents undressing, kids playing, private dinners, all recorded, tagged, cataloged. Gasps echoed through the houses like a wave of awakening. Curtains opened. Doors cracked. Phones filmed. "You sick freaks," someone yelled from a porch. "You've been spying on us?" shouted another. The agents froze under the weight of hundreds of phone cameras. Grandpa crossed his arms. "Looks like community transparency at last." Brittany turned pale. "You don't understand. This wasn't my call." Grandpa cut her off. "No, but you made it easy." Then the sirens began. Not HOA, not police. Government sirens, deeper, colder. Chloe's text buzzed again. "They're wiping the servers." Grandpa turned to me. "We end it now." We ran toward the pool building as agents scrambled, trying to lock doors. Grandpa kicked one open, fired the shotgun into the ceiling to scatter them, and headed straight for the console. The main screen showed a single prompt: purge all files. Grandpa grabbed the keyboard and typed, confirm. The system began to melt before our eyes, feeds flickering out, data collapsing. Then the floor vibrated, lights turning crimson. Self-destruct, he muttered. They're burning it all. I grabbed his arm. We have to go! He hesitated, glancing at the drives. Wait, back up. He pulled a USB from his pocket, jammed it into the terminal, and hit copy. Evidence, he said. The screen hit 92% before the explosion. We dove out the side door as the pool building blew, heat slamming our backs, shards raining across the lot. The blast lit up the night like sunrise. Drones, what few still worked, spiraled, flaming into the lawns. Grandpa hit the ground beside me, coughing, laughing, half mad. Well, he said, that's one way to end a homeowners meeting. I couldn't help laughing, too, half in relief, half in disbelief. The SUVs peeled out seconds later, leaving nothing but smoke and distant sirens. When the fire trucks arrived, they found us sitting on the curb, Grandpa holding the shotgun across his knees, me holding the drive. Reporters swarmed by morning, drawn by 100 live-streamed videos. By then, Grandpa was the internet's favorite anti-hero. Veteran Grandpa exposes HOA spy ring. They interviewed him on live TV. He wore the same faded trucker cap, winked, and said, "Just doing neighborhood watch, old school style." The HOA dissolved within a week. Brittany resigned, citing stress, though word was she'd been offered consulting work for something called Horizon Systems, probably the same outfit behind the whole mess. 3 weeks later, Grandpa and I moved out, traded the manicured lawns for an old farmhouse at the edge of town. But he didn't throw away the map. Sometimes at night, I'd catch him staring at it, tracing circles around other neighborhoods. They'll rebuild, he'd say quietly. Different names, same eyes. I asked what he'd do then. He smiled, the kind of smile that means trouble. Then we go visiting. One night I found him in the barn, tinkering with what looked suspiciously like another drone, but bigger, patched together from scrap. Its belly painted with the words, Neighborhood Watch 2.0. I stared, half amused, half terrified. You're serious? I asked. He nodded. Kid, you don't fight shadows with flashlights. You fight 'em with thunder. He tossed me a helmet. You in? I looked out across the fields, at the quiet night sky where no hums followed us anymore. For now. Yeah, I said. I'm in, he grinned, flipping a switch. The drone's rotors began to spin, slow, steady, hungry. The sound rose like a storm coming home. And just like that, Grandpa Roy Malaloy introduced himself to the next neighborhood exactly the way a thunderhead introduces rain, loud, sudden, and not taking a vote. The morning after the great drone incident, the neighborhood felt like a crime scene with no official tape. Just shattered propeller pieces glittering on Grandpa's driveway and the faint smell of battery smoke baked into the cement. Grandpa stood over the wreckage like a retired general surveying an old battlefield, arms crossed, coffee mug trembling slightly from either caffeine or the memory of the drone's last shriek before it hit the mailbox. They thought they could spy on me, he muttered, kicking a scorched rotor toward the gutter. But you don't out-tech a man who's lived through dial-up. Across the street, his arch-nemesis, Doug from the HOA, watched from behind his neatly trimmed hedge, phone in hand, pretending to take a picture of his roses while obviously recording Grandpa's every move. Rumor had it Doug was the one who owned the drone, part of some secret neighborhood security initiative. But the smirk on his face now looked less like authority and more like damage control. Grandpa, of course, didn't care about evidence. He cared about revenge. By noon, he'd already converted his old bird feeder into what he proudly called a signal jammer, which in reality was just a soup can wired to a battery and duct taped to the pole. When he flipped it on, half the block's Wi-Fi went down. Kids screamed from inside their houses like civilization itself had collapsed. Doug stormed across the street in his golf shirt, waving his tablet like a warrant. "You can't interfere with community surveillance, Gerald." he shouted, pronouncing Gerald as though it were an insult. Grandpa didn't even flinch. Then maybe the community shouldn't be flying spy drones over my tomato patch, he said, tilting his chin just enough to make Doug wonder what other contraptions he'd built overnight. The showdown drew spectators. Mrs. Cleary with her binoculars, the Peterson twins with popcorn, and old man Ramirez who, rumor said, once worked for the CIA but now just mowed lawns in slow motion. Doug threatened to call the authorities, which made Grandpa laugh until he coughed. "You think the cops will side with your little toy club?" "I still have my ham radio license," he boasted, as if that somehow granted immunity. Doug's face went red, but before he could retort, a new drone appeared. Sleek, black, humming low like a mechanical wasp. Everyone froze. This one wasn't Doug's. It hovered directly above them, camera lens gleaming, then dropped a small envelope onto the lawn between them and zipped off toward the hills. Grandpa stared at it, then at Doug. "You order Amazon Air now?" he asked. Doug shook his head, more confused than angry. The envelope bore no stamp, only a single printed phrase. "We know what you did." That night, Grandpa didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his binoculars, watching the sky flicker with faint blinking lights that could have been stars or machines. Around 2 a.m., a low buzz returned, not from above, but from inside the house. The old cordless phone lit up, though he hadn't used it in years. He picked it up, half expecting telemarketers from beyond the grave, but a distorted voice whispered, "Stop digging, Gerald." He froze. No one had called him that in decades except the Army and Doug. "Who is this?" he demanded, but the line went dead. By morning, Doug's perfect hedge was scorched in the shape of a spiral, as if something had landed there overnight. The HOA sent out a mass email blaming teen pranks and announced a new community watch program, complete with surveillance updates and property defense guidelines. Grandpa read it twice, then chuckled darkly. If they wanted a watch program, he'd give them one. He dusted off his old security monitor from the 90s and began wiring it to the back porch. What he didn't know was that the mysterious drone had already returned, hovering miles away over a bunker disguised as a utility station. Inside, men in dark uniforms watched his feed live, marking each move on a glowing map labeled Project Backyard. By day 3, Grandpa had gone full inventor mode. Aluminum foil shielding his shed, a CB radio rigged to scan unknown frequencies, and a notebook filled with cryptic entries like, "They listen through the sprinklers." The neighbors thought he was going senile until Mrs. Cleary's cat disappeared and her Ring camera caught a shadow lifting it into the air. Suddenly, everyone cared about Grandpa's theories. Doug called for an emergency HOA meeting in the community center, which now felt more like a war council. Grandpa arrived with blueprints rolled under his arm, slamming them onto the table like classified evidence. "This," he said, pointing at a rough sketch of concentric circles, "is not just one drone. It's a network. Someone's mapping the entire neighborhood." Doug laughed nervously, but his phone buzzed before he could answer. The screen showed live footage of himself right now at that very table from above. The room went silent. Outside, a faint whir grew louder until windows rattled. Grandpa looked up through the skylight. 10 drones in formation, lights blinking in eerie synchronization, forming a perfect triangle over the building. "You wanted surveillance, Doug," Grandpa muttered. "Now you've got it." The power cut out. The room plunged into darkness, and the only illumination came from the flickering glow of Doug's tablet as one by one the drone's lights turned red. Then the speakers crackled with the same distorted voice Grandpa had heard before. "Phase 2 initiated. Observe and extract." The roof creaked as if something heavy landed. Chaos erupted. People ducked under tables, someone screamed, and Doug's coffee spilled across the minutes sheet. Grandpa reached into his coat and pulled out what looked suspiciously like a remote detonator, but was actually the TV remote wrapped in electrical tape. He pressed it anyway. Somewhere outside, his homemade jammer overloaded, sending a pulse through the air that fried half the drones instantly. Sparks rained down like fireflies as the rest retreated toward the hills. When the lights came back on, the community center was in ruins, smoke panic, and the faint smell of burned plastic. Doug sat in disbelief, tie half undone. "What did you do?" he croaked. Grandpa just grinned, eyes gleaming with the kind of satisfaction only a man who's been underestimated his whole life could feel. "I defended my property," he said simply, stepping over a shattered projector. But as he walked outside, his confidence faltered. In the distance, beyond the cul-de-sac, a black van idled quietly, its antenna rotating like a radar. A figure inside lowered binoculars, muttering, "Target active." And as Grandpa lit his pipe, pretending not to notice, a small red dot blinked on his mailbox, countdown silently beginning again.